On this episode of Hot Rod Hoarders, we find a mysterious 409W motor, and we dig up the remains of a 55 Chevy drag car. So this story goes back several years. I remember as a kid passing this particular house and barn, and my dad telling me every time we passed it that there's a 409 in that barn. And, of course we thought it'd be cool someday to stop and talk to the guy and maybe end up buying the motor, but someday never came. And somebody actually got the engine before us, but luckily my dad knows every car guy around, and was able to talk to the guy, let him know that if he was to ever sell it, we would be interested in buying it. The guy responsible for this engine build was Don Roberts. He had a 55 Chevy drag car that he ran in B gas at local drag strips like Harriman Drag Strip, Loudon. I think he may have also ran at Raynard Optimus Drag Strip as well. He eventually got his hands on this 409 over-the-counter block and pieced it together with a few random pieces like 63 model high compression pistons. It's got a 62 model crank. It's just kind of put together out of a lot of different parts, but it was all stuff that worked well together and made a lot of horsepower. After some time had passed, the guy came by my dad's shop and let him know that he was ready to sell the motor and whatever parts came with it. So after we got the parts home, we kind of did a little inventory of everything. And what we had was a short block, which was a 409. We had some 348 cylinder heads. We had a 348 factory aluminum intake. We had a 348 oil pan, a T10 4-speed transmission that had a couple of ears broke off of it, and just some other random parts like exhaust manifolds for 348. And of course my dad was a little bit apprehensive because this stuff's been sitting in the weather. Even though it had a roof over it, it was in the weather for 40 plus years. So who knows if this thing was going to be good, if it was going to be usable, if it was going to be something we would be able to put back together or just talk about. We didn't know, so it was kind of a gamble. But it turned out to be a pretty amazing find. So these parts were rusted. They've had moisture around them for years and years, and the engine was stuck. After we poured a little oil down the cylinders, this thing broke free with very little effort. And we knew that this thing was going to be buildable. This is something we could legitimately put back together and really save a piece of history. So we found out this was an over-the-counter block because it didn't have any numbers or letters on the front pad of the block. Normally these would have a suffix code, which is a couple of letters. It'll have a series of numbers, which is a serial number, and even if it's a replacement block that GM provided as a warranty or something like that, it would have the letter CE and then a series of numbers after that. And this thing has nothing. It has no stamping whatsoever on the front of the block. It does have a casting number on the back of the block, which tells us it was built in 1963. So this engine was in such good shape, and all the parts were perfect. This was like taking apart a low mileage engine because it didn't see a lot of street time. It was mostly just a race engine. So we took it apart and decided that we wanted to build it, and my idea was to incorporate a magazine because I do a lot of magazine projects on the side. And so we built it for Super Chevy magazine. They did a 3-part series on it, and that kind of allowed us to go above and beyond what we normally would have done. But what we did was assemble the stock short block with all those original parts. We put a comp hydraulic roller camshaft in it, Edelbrock top end kit, which included aluminum heads, aluminum dual quad intake, 2 Edelbrock 500 CFM carburetors, and we were able to put this thing together and get it running again. the most surreal moment was seeing this thing on the dyno, actually hearing it on the dyno. And I wish I had video of that, but I don't. Alright, so why was this 409 engine sitting in the barn? Well, that's where the story gets interesting, because Don Roberts actually wrecked his 55 Chevy out on the street, testing, after he had had Jim Smith install a straight axle under the front of the car. Luckily he wasn't injured, and neither was his passenger, but the car was destroyed, so he took it back home, he took it all apart, put the engine and transmission in the barn, and then he took a backhoe and he dug a hole and he buried the rest of this 55 Chevy. Eventually curiosity got the best of me, and so I reached out to the Roberts family and eventually set up a day where I could come down there and talk to them a little bit about it, and asked them if the story was true. Is the car buried in the backyard? And they said, yeah, it's back there. If you want to go look for it, it's back there in the woods. Just look around and see if you can find anything sticking up out of the ground. And we took off out into the woods and looked for probably 30 minutes before we found the corner of the cowl and the firewall sticking up out of the ground. And basically Don had buried this thing right next to the creek. And I guess whenever the creek would rise and flood a little bit, it would wash away a little bit of the dirt. And so you could see a little bit of the car, and what you could see was actually in really good shape. There was still paint on it. You know, it's a crazy idea to try to dig up an old car out of the ground. So we thought about it. We decided that we were going to ask the family if it'd be okay if we tried to dig this thing up. You know, since we had the engine, it kind of made sense that if we had just a pile of an old 55 Chevy to go along with it, we'd have a really cool conversation piece. So after we got up the nerve to ask them, they gave us the go-ahead. You know, they probably thought we were crazy, but it's something we just had to find out. And I don't understand, I don't remember why we did it so early in the morning, but it was like 5 o'clock in the morning when we all met on the property there and unloaded everything and we had to cut trees down, we had to push trees over, we had to get a lot of stuff out of the way just to get back to the car. And you know, by the time we really got serious, I mean, the sun was just barely starting to come up. We started off pretty slow. We were really careful with shovels. We didn't want to get too carried away and destroy whatever was left of this car.
How about right there, that thing's about a foot. The roof is about a foot below that. That's it right there. That's the end. That's the end right there. Front. They cut the front of the frame off.
Do what?
They cut the front of the frame off. There ain't no way that it would just be that long.
So from there we started digging, just trying to find any piece that shows that this was a 55 Chevy gasser. You know, a big old rear end, or the front axle under it, or just anything that would really connect this car to that old engine.
I popped the sword. I didn't get the one I but I got another.
think it's got anything. Both hands are good.
So eventually, I'd say about an hour after getting started, we realized that there wasn't a whole lot to see here. You know, he had mashed the roof down and scooped dirt and creek rock and all this sort of stuff over the top of it. So, you know, it's not like we're going to pull out a pristine 55 Chevy. We knew that going in, but at the same time, we did want something that kind of resembled a car. And as we got a little bit further, we realized that that wasn't going to happen either. It really didn't make sense for us to try to pull this thing the rest of the way out of the ground. There just wasn't enough to show for it. So as bad as we hated to give up, we covered the car back up and considered it a lost cause. We did take the little piece of trim and we took the dash from it just as conversation pieces and I guess you could say souvenirs from our experience. I want to say a big thank you to the Roberts family for letting us go on their property and dig around and play in the dirt. And also a big thank you to Kyle Shadden. He's always our #1 guy when it comes to getting us out of a bind with trying to get one of our vehicles home. And then a thank you to my dad for just being my #1 motivator when it comes to these crazy ideas. And you know, he was just as excited about this as I was. And I really wanted to share it here because if I was to tell people about this without showing them video footage of it, they probably wouldn't believe us. Just like I didn't necessarily believe that that car was buried in the first place. You know, this is something that me and Kyle are going to be talking about for years. I mean, we're going to tell our grandkids about that time that we went and dug a car out of the ground. And, you know, the same way with my dad, he's probably already told 10,000 people about it because his shop is really a pretty big hangout for everybody. But, you know, it was worth it. It was worth the experience. It was worth the money renting the mini excavator. You know, we had a good time. We laughed a lot. We really enjoyed it. If you like this sort of thing, hit the subscribe button and you'll see all of our new videos with project updates, drag racing coverage, and all sorts of other fun stuff. Thank you for watching.